You're listening to Consulting Logistics, presented by Freight Plus. I'm your host, Kyle McNaught. Thanks for checking us out. To quote Susan Taylor Martin, the chief executive at BSI, this past few years have put a spotlight on global supply chains and reinforced their critical role in our day-to-day lives. Because of this unprecedented moment, though, the supply chain is about to have a make or break year and needs to be right at the top of C-suite agendas. Now, unfortunately for organizations, supply chains and logistics operations and programs are at risk. So in this episode, I'm going to have Jim Yarbrough, Global Intelligence Program Manager at BSI, join the show to provide some insights on a recently released report, Delivering Supply Chain Resilience, the 5 questions we need to answer in 2022 by BSI. A really great report. I put the link to it in the show notes. It's something you should definitely go check out if you're in charge of anything to do with your company's supply chain. But in this conversation, we're going to discuss the importance of 2022 and what it will have on the supply chains. And then finally, 5 key themes for a successful and sustainable supply chain. So without further ado, hey, Jim, how's it going? Thanks for joining me today.
Hi, Kyle. Yeah, nice to be here. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. I know you're probably crazy busy this week, so I really appreciate the time you're taking to just talk to me, especially about your report. I'm so excited. I got a chance to read it. So chock filled with a ton of great information, a lot of great insights, stuff that people can actually act upon, which is huge with the report. Just for the audience, give a little background about yourself before we even jump right into all that stuff.
Oh, sure. Yeah. Well, I've been working here at BSI in this role, 12 plus years now. So like anything before that seems like a lifetime ago. But yeah, I got my start really in this world, examining export controls around the world and doing assessment work as a contractor for the State Department. And went out into like Eastern European and did like works projects there in terms of like assessing like how well border crossings were being secured and goods. And then that kind of just led me to some conversations with other people around the country, and eventually landed at BSI working building an intelligence platform that was designed for the CTPAT program, the supply chain security program here in the US, that was designed to provide really thorough analysis and objective analysis around what are the threats in the supply chain. And again, that started about 12 years ago, well, 13 years ago at this point. And really it's just kind of grown since that point to, helping out a lot of different types of organizations around the world protecting their supply chains.
Yeah, I love what you guys have been doing. I mean, we talked to your colleague Tony Pelly on the show before. We talked to a decent amount of actually BSI people, but you guys are putting out some amazing stuff and really, really just insightful, especially when people are looking for resources to help explain what the heck's going on.
Yeah.
BSI is kind of your products, what you guys, your information and your knowledge is amazing, and like not to continue with that. To continue with that, it's your annual supply chain risk insights report that just came out. Talk a little bit about that report, kind of what goes into it. How long have you guys been creating this? Give me a little more kind of a basic kind of overview of the report.
Yeah, yeah. I've lost count how many years now we've put this report out, but in its original design, it was that we had every year we collect like just an enormous amount of data and information about what are the actual incidents happening around the world in the supply chain. And the report was originally designed to be like a summation of what those findings are, and it still has a lot of that in there. But as we've kind of grown in scope and scale of what we do, but also what the demands are of supply chain protection really is around the world, the reports shifted a little bit to now it's a lot more about planning for the future and like what do you need to do to prepare yourself for the next year. And that's kind of why the release date is a lot different today than it has been in the past. And really the utility of the reports changed a lot over the years as well too.
So let's give me a little like that's all kind of historic, but I mean,
Yeah.
2021 to 2022 is very different.
Yeah.
What's going to be what's different about this year's report compared to all the other years and everything?
Yeah, I would say like the big change from our perspective is, I mentioned, I've been doing this for 12 plus years. It's always been a challenge for us to um, really kind of get an appreciation from everyone about how critical the supply chain is, and both what the challenges and the opportunities are within the supply chain. And those things have changed now, right? Like, the supply chain is front page headline news every single day, and we've all felt, personally, issues within the supply chain during the pandemic. You go to the store and there's empty shelves, or you're trying to get something shipped to your house and it's going to be months delay and stuff. So what's different now is the awareness and the appreciation of this type of work, is that it impacts everybody around the world. And I think one of the common threads throughout the report this year is talking about, certainly there's a lot of challenges and a lot of things you've got to overcome, but really there's a lot of opportunity within the supply chain too. And how do we address the challenges in the supply chain, but open up opportunity for workers and laborers all around the world? How do we create opportunity to address climate change and issues like that through work in the supply chain? And I think that's really the big shift, is that mindset of, wow, there's a whole lot of opportunity here within supply chain work to make some changes in the world that really impact people.
I mean, just the sheer amount of people that have sent me the link from the 60 Minutes piece or the 2020 piece on supply
Yeah,
chain right now, it is top of mind of everyone.
absolutely. Yeah. And really, didn't anticipate that happening, before the pandemic or whatever.
Right.
But I guess that could be, the silver lining of all of this mess, is that now we see an opportunity to really make some changes in the world.
Yeah, no, it's definitely that's the as much of a headache as it is, as much of it's a lot of hard work and a lot of long nights and days. At least you're getting support. At least you're getting awareness. I mean, I know one of
Yeah.
the things that I really liked is your even your CEO said like it's an unprecedented moment. The supply chain's it's about to have a make or break year, and it
Yeah.
needs to be at the top of every C suite's agenda, which is just amazing. I know I talked to my ops guys, I talked to them and they're like, yeah, back in the like it was the crisis at the ports like a couple of
Yeah.
years ago. And they're like, yeah, that was the last time C-suite kind of cared about supply chain. It's like this is oh wow type of moment.
Yeah. I think, a lot of people that work day in and day out in supply chain issues, it's like the top of the organizations are, they see supply chain as, where do we cut costs? How do we increase our profit margins through supply chain work? And now I think the conversation has really shifted to, how do we protect our brand? How do we protect our reputation? How do we respond to consumer pressure, in terms of what the consumer is expecting from supply chains now? And the discussions at the C-suite level are much different today than they have been in the past. And that's a really good thing.
Absolutely. And I know in the report you kind of called out like the three C's as I kind of like was able to figure it out, but like
Mhm.
climate, crime, and convergence like seem to be the
Uh,
big risk that are coming out. Especially kind of I love how you guys laid it out. Again, we were talking before this interview of
mhm.
like asking like the five big questions to answer was like genius. I loved how do you stay resilient? How do you make sure you can continue business continuity? But talk a little bit about those three big C's. Like what exactly is happening this year, especially kind of from 2021, that's making these stand out a little bit more?
Yeah. I think everything that we're talking about is a kind of a culmination of pressures coming from different directions, right? So I mentioned the consumer pressure, and with all of the things that we just discussed, the headlines of supply chains and the awareness of people, consumer awareness and everything has certainly been on the increase for years. But now there is an expectation at the consumer level that if I'm purchasing a product, or if I'm going to be loyal to a brand, there's an expectation there that these products need to be produced in an ethical and humane way. That companies, and organizations' commitments to, emissions and climate change initiatives, that there's some teeth to that. There's some backbone to what those commitments are. So there's pressure coming from that side, but then there's a lot of regulatory changes around the world that are holding organizations accountable for their responsibilities within the supply chain. So that runs the gamut from deforestation regulations to labor, making sure that the labor involved in there is not impacting human rights or environmental issues. And there's just a lot of this. It's in the United States, it's in Canada, it's in the European Union, it's in the United Kingdom. A lot of regulations that are pointing to, you need to be more accountable for what's happening in your supply chain. And so, that consumer pressure and the regulatory pressure, plus that convergence that you're talking about, where we see a lot of information that um, business continuity disruptions, be the labor disruptions or protests, they often lead to security issues in the supply chain. You mentioned the ports in Long Beach and Los Angeles is what I'm assuming you're referring to. And
Yep.
yeah, years ago when the labor disruption happened there, we did see increases in cargo crime in that area. And again, now as we have a huge backup of products, we are seeing there and in other places around the world increases in crime. Stealing of cargo from containers, from trucks, from warehouses. All of those things are kind of coming. So yeah, those three C's you're talking about, that's kind of what we're talking about. There's all of those things are kind of coming together into one knot of issues. And those questions that you're referring to, that's the questions that we're seeing from our clients a lot these days too. So that's kind of where all of that materialized from.
Yeah, I love it. I mean, it's good, especially when you're out there. If you're kind of working in your supply chain or trying to you're worried about the risk and how do I maintain it. It's a great to be able to see what others are asking, understand and see the
Yeah.
context. I mean, that's what I really liked about your report is you guys provide your experts are giving actual advice of why they're suggesting this, why they're seeing this, why they're hearing this, which is huge. But let's flip it a little bit. Let's jump in because I mean the report
Yeah.
isn't all just doom and gloom. You guys do give kind of what you say are like the five key themes, especially to as I have written down here. It's just five key themes for you and your team to help organizations achieve resiliency. So I really liked how you broke it down. Let's jump into it. I mean, the first one's the supplier transparency is a key decider of business success. I mean, can you talk a little bit more about that? Why is it a trusted supplier or partner just going to be vital in 2022?
Yeah, a lot of this came from again, we were getting a lot of questions from media, and just kind of the narrative around supply chain was really in the first days of the or months of the pandemic. It was so much literature and information about there's going to be a lot of nearshoring, and there's just going to be an upheaval in suppliers for organizations all around the world. And we're hesitant to say that that's going to be the case.
Right.
Certainly, there's a lot of interest in new suppliers, and there's a lot of activity going on there. I'm not saying that there's zero, but the amount of effort and investment that organizations have already put into their relationships with their suppliers and the premier organizations that we work with, that's a lot of time and money and effort, and it's paid off for those organizations in really big ways. And we just don't see that going away. Like that time and effort is, sunk cost. You want to continue those relationships, but it's also a bit of like a mind shift of saying, okay, the supplier and the business partners that we work with, if what we see the best organizations do is if we empower those organizations to make decisions on their own or to address risks on their own, and they also trickle that down to their suppliers, that's really the key to everything we're talking about here. It's that multiplier effect, right? Like it's a lot of people do that within their own organizations. How do we build resiliency and um, resiliency within our own organization, but how do you move that to your supply chain, and how do you empower and enable your suppliers to also be resilient? And that's where we really see like orders of magnitude of like people, organizations really say, wow, our supply chain is really working for us now. We know that our suppliers and our business partners are working very hard themselves to root out risk and to make sure that our company's goals and our organizational goals are actually being met through the supply chain as well too. And it's really a different mindset that's really taken off, and a lot of great work and great progress has been done through that work.
Yeah, I know it's one of the things we work at here. It's a lot of that having that conversation, working with not just your clients, but your clients' customers and their
Mhm.
suppliers and everything, having a good conversation. It's one of those you almost feel unfair sometimes when a large enterprise can dedicate that. Whereas if you're a small or mid-sized business and you're trying to run the supply chain, you're like, dude, I'm just fires are being put out day to day.
Yeah.
But you're like you say, it's vital. Especially the one thing that really was eye opening to me was you guys put a lot of attention to the criminal element, which is
Mhm.
something that you really don't think about. But I mean, you even said it's there's criminal organizations masquerading as legitimate companies working in warehouses, transportation, and distribution. Like fake carriers are increasing in the
Yeah.
number of countries. I mean, it's something that Can you give me a little more example of that? Because it's like I'm reading that, I'm like, wait, is this real? Like, how is this an opera? How is this a possibility? But it clearly is absolutely something you got to be aware of.
Oh, it's very real for sure. Yeah, it's we years ago, we thought this was like the most sophisticated tactics we were seeing from criminals around the world. It usually, like, with and through investigations, you would see like this is really organized crime, masquerading as these legit companies. But now the proliferation of online marketplaces, and another part of this too is the labor shortage in the logistics industry. It kind of like opens up this opportunity for organizations to get, I don't want to say desperate, but you're scrambling, like you said before, the small and
Taking the
medium
risk.
sized companies, like, where
Right.
do I find a logistics company that can meet my warehousing needs
I
or
need,
my
yeah, I need to
shipping
move this
needs?
product. I need to get this somewhere. Like I got to
Yeah,
take a risk. Capacity is so crazy. And sometimes it's almost like too good to be true, right? You see a spot rate, you
yeah.
see this stuff of like, okay, everyone else is quoting me this insane number. Maybe this is a good one, but it
Yeah,
is.
and I've been there too myself. I didn't mention this earlier, but I used to be a warehouse manager for a rug company many, many years
Oh
ago, a
wow.
really small organization. But we had, suppliers, and we were moving freight really rapidly stuff. And so, yeah, you're on the phone in the morning trying to find the best carrier, and you're just doing the best you can, right? But
Right, right.
now with what used to be like really isolated incidents, and frankly they used to be in continental Europe. That's where we'd see them mostly. We see it in every region of the world now, of really sophisticated masquerading of real logistics companies, or we've seen hacking into legitimate logistics companies and actually getting their freight pickups and delivery schedules, and then masquerading there, and all kinds of crazy stuff. But yeah, it's a real problem, but it's just something to be aware of, and there's a lot of ways to kind of look out for what are the telltale signs. And again, like you're asking, like supplier transparency and working with those business partners and building those relationships. That's where that stuff really comes into. It's really important, right? That's where it really comes into play.
Yeah, no, I mean it's so important. I love just how the call out because I mean it's something that like we preach, right? It is about that vetting your carriers, making sure that they
Yeah,
understand what your needs are, what your standards are. Because like you said at the beginning, the consumers, customers, they this is your brand. I mean
mhm,
that's the most interesting thing. Your supply chain has become your brand.
yeah.
It's as great as like the Nike swoosh is, making sure my Nike, like my things are available when I want them, when I ordered them, and all that type of stuff's vital. But it's so important. I really found that fascinating, especially that you're right. Like it's crazy of like how hackable most logistics companies really are
Yeah.
because they're just kind of getting into technology right now. Some of them are more sophisticated, but especially nationally in the US, like they're still kind of they're learning. I sit on plenty of roundtables where if they make fun of them, call them dinosaurs, but I mean, there is still a level of sophistication there. Unfortunately, there's a lot of pain that goes into like understanding how to kind of beef up your security, especially when it comes to digitally.
Yeah, no question. And again, it's an environment where the competition is fierce, and the room for error is tiny. And you've
Right.
got to, yeah, it's just it's a fast moving, and there's just not a lot of like extra room, if you
Yeah.
will, in that world. And yeah, it's just really opened up a lot of opportunity for criminals to kind of like, oh, I see an opportunity, I'm going to run right in there and take advantage of that. Yeah.
It's not Vin Diesel and gang and Fast and
Yeah.
Furious, the first one, stealing a bunch of DVDs off a truck down a lone desert highway anymore. It's actually a lot more sophisticated.
Exactly. Yeah.
Anytime we
Yeah.
work in Fast and Furious, I'm going to do it. Sorry. The next key to what you guys talk about, a shifting environmental and social governance regulatory environment. I mean that's I know green's something we all want to do. It's something that I mean, yeah, like for the most part, if using common sense, like, yeah, I want to make sure we're net zero carbons, we're doing a green thing. But what makes it a little different? Like, why is it going to be increasing in this upcoming year?
Yeah. Again, it's those two different things. Like, there is a lot more consumer expectation that you're doing something about this issue. And I mean, the issue is becoming kind of like the supply chain stuff. The climate issues are becoming a lot more apparent and obvious to people in their day-to-day lives, right? Like you're seeing crazy weather patterns, you're seeing power outages, and here in the United States, even you're seeing wildfires, and you know the time of debating climate change is long past, right? Like
Right.
that's sorry, but it's real.
Right, right, right.
And you are seeing, so there's that consumer expectation, and so a lot of organizations are making a lot of statements about their involvement in how do you mitigate climate change and what are our emissions goals going to be. And so now you've got to put some evidence to that now as well too. And so there's that side of it. But I mentioned the deforestation regulations. There's other things too around the world, but in Canada, the United Kingdom, there's other countries that are involved in this too. But putting forth regulations and legislation that addresses, can you ensure that your product, when it ends up on our store shelves in our country, that it has not contributed to deforestation in the Amazon. And the implications of that throughout the supply chain are pretty large, right? Like you've got to show evidence of that you've worked with your supplier and your business partner, and you have documented evidence that you're not involved in any kind of deforestation in this region, even if you are working with organizations there. And so there's just a lot more expectation and requirements, if you will, from legislation now than there ever has been before. And thankfully, what we're seeing is a lot of proaction from organizations that want to get in front of these issues, and they are doing everything they can to really set the bar really high these days, to provide that consumer with confidence that this organization, this brand that I'm buying from, is doing their part.
Yeah, and I mean, you mentioned it in the report too. It's like there's those big goals. The I forgot you actually wrote it down. I wrote down here of like, how do you ensure you're being true to company goal amidst the maelstrom of everyday business life? I mean, that's going to be the biggest
Yeah.
struggle, right? As much as these lofty company goals, and as much as we all agree with it, at the end of the day, like, you're a warehouse manager in the rug. You got to get the product out. You got to move. Like as much as you want to take the steps, sometimes it's understanding corporately and kind of a top down of like, hey, this is why this is so important. This is why we're going to maintain this, and how holding your feet to the fire almost per se.
Yeah, that's exactly it. So, we look at this as an organization wide approach, right? An end to end risk assessment, or full on, like, how does every person in that organization buy in and understand what are our company goals, what are our organizational goals, and how does that affect me personally as I work through my day? And that's a really key component. And a lot of you when you're thinking supply chain work and how do we improve the resiliency of the supply chain, you think of procurement, you think of compliance, you think these kind of standard departments, right? But
Mhm.
what about human resources? What about the HR department? And there's a lot of opportunity there to say, okay, HR can help us with who we hire and who are we, the insider threat of a lot of these crimes we're talking about. We see numbers now in these crimes where the someone inside an organization was involved in these criminal incidents at a much higher rate than we have seen in years past. And um, so, HR does need to be involved in these issues. They need to understand, why is this important? Why, the vetting of employees, and then also the training and the education throughout the organization. That's an HR responsibility a lot of times as well, too. So, that maelstrom that you're talking about, yeah, it's going to take, the whole company. Everybody needs to understand the mission, and everybody needs to see where they have a part to play and a role to play in this solution. And when you kind of start at that, you can see, through your day-to-day work, how it impacts these improvements we want to see in the supply chain. And when people get involved in that effort, all across the organization, you see a lot more rapid results from these efforts.
Yeah, I mean, I think it even speaks to that next key point you guys really talk about, of just a holistic understanding of pain points. I mean, it's a team event, right? It's not an
Yeah.
individual supply chain. Especially, I think another thing we're like the opposite side. We're seeing the media and the kind of consumers hope or wish for a boogeyman when it comes to kind of supply chain issues right now. And I think that's something that the holistic understanding makes some sense, but can you talk a little bit more of why a holistic understanding helps you understand it's a lot of individual players that are kind of that cause pain points in supply chains?
Yeah, to me, it's we focus a lot on single points of failure within the supply chain, and that concern that there's this one card out of the house of cards that can come out and the whole thing comes crumbling down, and that's a big like component of resilience, right? Is that like you build resilience so that a single point of failure is not an issue within your organization. And I know that that's easier said than done, but the fact remains, like that resiliency, part of that understanding is being flexible, being realistic. If there is a chip shortage in the world and we all know that it's there, then you need to be realistic about what are we going to be able to produce and deliver in 2022 if we depend on this certain thing. And so just setting your expectations to a realistic level, but building that resilience and that redundancy within the supply chain, and trying to avoid that single point of failure, and just with the mindset again of like we have a strong program, and certainly there's going to be challenges, but we're going to be able to withstand those challenges because everything within our organization is really strong, and on a really strong foundation you're going to be better off than other people. And that's really the kind of the key point there, I think.
Yeah, I think realistic is the buzzword, right?
Yeah.
It's be realistic. Like you, especially, I know like the port congestion, something everyone's like, well, is there a way that I can get out of there? You're like, no, let's be realistic. Like
Yeah.
every company's suffering with port congestion right now. Like you want your product here as much as everyone else wants their product. Let's be realistic. How do we kind of be proactive? And I think knowledge and information is the most important thing. And it's something that BSI is doing an amazing job at really putting that type of stuff out, being understanding what the holistic pain points are, where all everything's kind of happening, and being realistic of what you can actually solve instead of like, well, near shore. It's like you aren't going to near shore. Let's be realistic. Like there's
Yeah.
a worker shortage here. You're near shore, and all of a sudden everyone wants to work for your company. Come on. Uh, moving, I know your time's valuable, so I'm going to try to quickly go past through the next 2 points. Is adapting to convergences of business challenges. I think this is with the speed of information, with the consumer buying behavior just being so fast and so kind of brutal, unfortunately, and then a lot of other kind of things coming in. How what how do you like you advise that having a working group, especially in organizations, to find a solution? I mean, what's a successful company look like if they're doing kind of what you guys are advising? How's that working group? Is it meeting daily? Is it 15-minute stand-ups? Like what are they doing?
Yeah, that's a good question. Yeah, it's the working group where we've seen a lot of success there is again bringing in multiple stakeholders that again you may want to think outside of the box. Okay, let's not just leave this strictly to our historical supply chain people. They are absolutely necessary for these conversations, but you do want to start bringing in other components of the organization, and you mentioned like IT, your IT department and the cybersecurity. That's going to be critical, right? HR, we talked about that. It could be training, could be other areas too. But that working group, what they need to establish is that mission statement. And this is what our working group is designed to do. Everybody gets a very firm understanding of what that means and how their role is going, what their role is in terms of creating these solutions that they want, and then cascading that throughout the organization. And how often you meet or the design of that's kind of up to the organization. But one thing where we found this to be really successful is developing pilot programs and determining, okay, we can run these new ideas with some key suppliers or key business partners, and then let's test it and see what works and what doesn't work, and take what works, and move it along. And also, improving that pilot program, that idea of like this is a continuous never ending process, right? Like we're always here to refine, make it sharper, make it better, and then implement. And then taking what used to be, let's look at this supplier every 3 years or every 5 years and do a risk assessment on that. That is really old school thinking. Like this needs to be, we have to adapt, learn and adapt and implement. And if you can do that faster and continuously, you're going to be in a much better position.
Yeah, I love that idea of pilots. I mean, you find your rock stars, your suppliers, you find the
Mhm.
people that are willing to kind of take that journey because they see the value, because you can't expect everyone to see the exact same thing that you're doing. So
Yeah.
finding the ways and then being able to learn from that. I mean, you find a lot of times like company wide, we're going to do this. And then like, well, you immediately find all these gaps. Whereas if you would have done a smaller pilot and really kind of brought all the people to the table and had a good, be ready to fail. And like you say, just you export, you're evaluating, you're reevaluating, and you're ready trying to make it more efficient, always trying to improve, because too much stuff happens. Like it's
Yeah.
impossible.
Yeah, that blanket approach is not going to work. Like
Oh,
you need
at
to
all.
be, yeah, you got to be a lot more sophisticated than that these days. Yeah.
For sure. All right, the last key one. I love this one, so I can't wait to talk about it. But identifying opportunities and emerging trends. I mean, what? Give me a little bit. What some of the kind of the opportunities that you kind of you've been spotting in emerging trends?
Yeah, I know this could come across as like a hokey statement, but I really believe that your work in the supply chain can save the world. Like there's these issues that we're talking about. Like just think about like the orders of magnitude that you could create through the supply chain work of, if the consumer has these expectations and these regulations are coming down the pike, and the organization kind of sees this as like, well, we have to address these issues, but look at the size of these companies we're talking about. If these extremely large organizations are ensuring that human rights are at the forefront of all the supply chain work they're going to do, and the environmental impacts is going to be something that they continuously assess and work to improve through their suppliers, you're suddenly talking about one organization affecting thousands of workers and laborers. And if you start moving that across to all of these really large organizations, and they are all moving in that direction, there's going to be dramatic improvements in people's lives through work in the supply chain. And to me, like that's the message that really needs to get across to people, is that this work is valuable work that's worth doing, and it's going to impact many people's lives through this. And I have never, in all of these years that we've been doing this work, uh, seen an organization where this didn't work, these approaches did not work, or did not have dramatic improvements in people's lives across the world. And so like that's the main message I want to get across, is that this is some really valuable work that people are having a lot of success with.
You know what's really cool is on this podcast I do a series called Supply Chain Under 30, where we talk to like kind of the up and coming young professionals. And one thing that like stands out, a lot of them is like a lot of them didn't really think about supply chain when they come in here, but when they got
Mhm.
into it, they kind of found that sort of that nonprofit passion that the millennials and Gen Zs want to have when it comes to their work. They're like, it's really cool seeing that like what I'm doing is helping get products to people like that need it. Like sure, getting you like toilet paper seems kind of comical, but at the same point, it's like,
Yeah.
well, then you're not going out. You're helping kind of the us recover. You're helping kind of create a better sustainable thing. Like a lot of cool. I find that a lot of the younger professionals coming up are starting to kind of have that aha moment of like, yeah, there's actually kind of a pride I can take about my job, like of what I'm doing and why some of this work stinks, but it is hard work for a purpose, which is one of the things that like everyone kind of wants to have, right?
That's exactly right. And I really think a large part of my role and what we want to do here is connecting people. And the supply chain, yeah, like there's that bottom line kind of part to it, but connecting people's really grand goals in life and stuff to the work that they do every day. And there's just so many talented people out there, and I'm really fortunate I get to work with a lot of them every single day. And you're right. I mean, that ability to wake up in the morning and say, this is going to be hard work, but man, look at what we can do through it. It's really remarkable. And to me, that's the biggest change over these years of working, where it used to be very myopic and like, oh, how do we prevent another theft from this warehouse, to now we're
Right.
talking about like, how do we radically change the world for the better? And that's really just awesome to be a part of. Yeah.
Yeah, it's so cool. I want to leave. I want to end this podcast on a positive note. As much as this, every one episode I've done since 2020 seemed to be very negative. So I'm going to end with that optimism of like, this is a really cool trend. People are starting to realize like, hey, what we do really helps the world kind of continue to grow and be a better place for everyone. So I love that idea. Jim, what's the best way for people to kind of get this report? Where should they be going? How do they download it? How do they get in contact with you?
Yeah, real easy. Go to bsigroup.com. You'll see our report there. And if you want to contact me, The easiest way is really easy, so you don't have to spell screen@bsigroup.com. You can email, that'll get to our team, and certainly will get to me too. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely love it. I've talked multiple times about the screen and the Connect, all the cool platforms you put out, because at the end of the day, everything's just being informed. And that's what you guys do a great job of, really providing that information out there. So I really love everything you're doing. We'll put links in the show notes for everyone. And Jim, thank you for your time today.
Thank you so much. It was awesome to be on here, and have a great day.
You too. And that's our show. Download the report right now, link in the show notes. In the meantime, like and subscribe to our channel. Thanks for watching Consulting Logistics. I'm Kyle McNaught. Rock and roll.